The night the secret finally surfaced, the air inside the Maple Ridge funeral home felt impossibly still, as if the building itself understood the weight of what was about to be revealed. Soft organ music drifted through the dim hallway, barely audible over the hushed murmurs of grieving guests. A storm gathered outside, clouds pressing low over the streets of northern Connecticut, where rain had begun to fall in cold, uneven sheets. But inside the main viewing room, beneath the glow of amber lights and the scent of lilies turning sour with time, two women who had never met were walking toward the same casket, believing they were the only widow of Thomas Everett Hale. The first, Margaret Hale, stepped forward with a practiced grace. Tall, poised, mid-50s, her silver wedding band glimmered as she touched the edge of the polished mahogany. She whispered something only she and her late husband could ever hear. Something sudden, more tired than sad. 27 years of marriage carried weight like that. Across the room, unaware, walked the second woman. Younger by almost 20 years, with auburn hair falling loosely past her shoulders and a nervous tremble in her steps. Her name was Elena Brooks. She too wore a wedding ring, and she too believed she was the only woman Thomas Hale had ever promised forever. To everyone else in the funeral home, nothing looked unusual. Just another grieving crowd, just another rainy night, just another man whose life ended too soon. But in that particular room on that particular night, the truth was about to erupt in a way none of them were prepared for. Because Thomas Hale had crafted a life built on precision, image, and discretion, an accountant who believed the most dangerous secrets were those written on paper. And so he avoided paper. He avoided documentation. He avoided anything that could expose the double life he had spent over 17 years constructing. Two wives, two homes, two worlds he moved between with the same calm smile and polished charm. But death is the great equalizer. And as the storm rumbled and Margaret reached the casket first, gently adjusting Thomas's tie, Elena froze several feet away, confusion scribbling across her face. Her eyes flicked from the casket to the woman standing over it, to the framed wedding photo displayed by the flowers. A photo of Thomas and Margaret, a photo that should not exist, at least not in her version of his life. For the first time, something cracked inside her composure. She leaned closer, reading the small brass plaque under the portrait. Thomas Everett Hale and wife, Margaret, 1998. Elena's pulse quickened, her throat tightening as her fingers dug into the strap of her purse. She tried to steady her breath, sorting through every memory Thomas had ever given her, every explanation for his absences, every lie she didn't yet know was a lie. He had been with her for 6 years. 6 years of birthdays, holidays, promises. 6 years of calling her his only love. But now, staring at the photo at the front of the room, she felt reality bend in a way that made her knees weaken. The truth wasn't just wrong, it was it was impossible. She whispered, barely audible, Who is she? Someone behind her answered without hesitation, That's his wife. Lena turned slowly toward the voice, an older man, someone she didn't recognize. The kind who assumed everyone at a funeral shared the same knowledge, the same history, the same grief, the same truth. Elena swallowed, her voice breaking. His wife. The man nodded, wiping his eyes. Married forever, those two. Real partnership. I don't know how she'll survive this. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Her vision blurred, her mind spiraling, her world tilting off its axis. Because standing just across the room was a woman Thomas had promised his life to long before he promised it to her. And across the casket lay a truth Thomas had worked desperately to bury, deep beneath polished lies, hidden trips, false explanations, and carefully compartmentalized routines. The betrayal wasn't subtle. It was catastrophic, and it was only the beginning. Because the moment Elena stepped toward Margaret, tears gathering, questions forming, shock overtaking fear, she had no idea that what she was about to say, what she was about to expose, would ignite a chain reaction that would unravel not just two marriages, but an entire financial empire Thomas had built on deception. An empire worth $6.2 million. A fortune neither woman even knew existed. A sum Thomas had somehow managed to hide in plain sight until the day both of his lives collided under the same funeral home roof. As thunder cracked outside, Elena drew a long, unstable breath and whispered the words that shattered everything. Ma'am, I think we need to talk. I'm Thomas's wife too. For several seconds, time didn't move. Margaret lifted her head slowly, turning toward the trembling voice behind her. Their eyes met, two women bound by the same man, the same ring, the same betrayal neither had seen coming. The room fell silent. Conversations died mid-sentence. People turned, their faces tightening with confusion and shock. Margaret didn't speak at first. She simply stared, studying Elena's wedding band, her shaking hands, the desperate sincerity etched into her face. And for all the composure Margaret carried, something in her expression broke. Something deep, private, and irreparable. All at once, the truth, long buried, carefully protected, meticulously hidden, began to claw its way to the surface. And this funeral, meant to mourn the end of one life, had just become the birthplace of a storm neither woman could control. As this moment settled like a stone in the room, and the shock rippled through the guests, a question hung heavy in the tense air. How long had Thomas Hale been living a double life? And why did he work so hard, spending years, perhaps decades, to keep both women convinced they were his only love? Before we go deeper into the shadows of this unfolding disaster, take a moment and think. If a lifetime of promises suddenly collapsed into a single devastating truth, would you seek answers or revenge? Your perspective matters here, not for the algorithm, not for engagement, but because stories like this echo differently in every life they touch. The storm outside intensified, rain smearing the windows of the funeral home, as if the sky itself carried the weight of the lie finally exposed. And standing on opposite sides of the casket, Margaret and Elena seemed unable to move, trapped between disbelief and the inevitable unraveling of everything Thomas had left behind. Margaret's voice finally surfaced, quiet, steady, but vibrating with disbelief. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Thomas would never. He couldn't. Who are you?" Elena's breath hitched. "I'm his wife," she said again, softer. "We were married 6 years ago in Los Altos. He told me he was divorced. He told me you were gone." A ripple of gasps spread through the room. Margaret staggered back as if struck. Her grip on the casket tightened until her knuckles whitened. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head. "No, no, that's not possible. Thomas was with me. He was always with me." The lie echoed inside her, louder the second time. Always, always, except for the nights he claimed to be at client conferences. The weekends dedicated to accounting retreats. The sudden work emergencies that pulled him from holidays. The phone calls he took outside, always insisting they were nothing important. Elena's voice wavered as she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded marriage certificate, creased from hours of shaking hands, holding it in disbelief. "He was with me too, more often than you'd believe." A murmur spread through the guests. Pity for these two strangers now bound by betrayal, anger at a man who could orchestrate such a deception, and anticipation for the fallout no one could yet fathom. Margaret's knees buckled slightly, and a neighbor rushed to steady her. She pressed a trembling hand to her forehead as her world began to fracture. "He said we were planning a trip this fall," she whispered. "He said he bought tickets. He said so many things." Elena nodded slowly, painfully. "He said the same to me." Thunder rolled above the building, vibrating the floorboards. It was the kind of night meant for confessions, not farewells. As the tension pulsed through the room, a new voice entered the scene, firm, uneasy, deeply authoritative. "Mrs. Hale, both of you?" It was Detective Samuel Rourke of the Hartford County Sheriff's Office, a man with a square jaw, tired eyes, and a growing suspicion that this funeral was about to spiral into something far larger than a marital betrayal. He approached cautiously, aware that his presence alone altered the mood. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to talk. Both of you. Privately." Elena tensed. Margaret straightened, wiping tears from her cheeks. Confusion shifted into dread. Detective Rourke gestured toward the hallway. "It's about your husband, about Thomas." He lowered his voice. "There are details you both need to hear, and documents you haven't been shown yet." Margaret blinked. "Documents? About what?" Rourke hesitated, weighing how much to reveal in public. "His financial accounts, his travel records, and, well, it's best we discuss it somewhere quiet. Somewhere away from the casket, somewhere away from the watching eyes, somewhere the truth could be exposed safely." Elena looked around, terrified and out of breath. "What's happening?" Rourke exhaled slowly. We believe Mr. Hale wasn't just living a double life emotionally. He paused. There are indications he also hid a substantial amount of money, far more than either of you were aware of. Margaret's lips parted, shock rippling across her features. Money? What money? The detective lowered his gaze. Approximately $6.2 million. The world froze again. Even the storm seemed to quiet. Elena whispered, 6.2. What? Margaret clutched the edge of a chair. That's impossible. Thomas wasn't rich. We lived modestly. We struggled some years. That's what we thought too, Rourke said. Until this morning. The women stared at him, their grief now tangled with suspicion, betrayal, and a rising dread they couldn't yet articulate. Rourke continued, I'm sorry, but we're going to need both of you to come with us. Your husband's life was more complicated than either of you realized. And if we don't move quickly, whatever he was hiding may disappear for good. Margaret whispered, disappear? How? Rourke met her gaze. Because someone else has already accessed one of the accounts. The words sliced through the room like a blade. Someone else. Someone neither of them knew existed. Someone connected to Thomas. Or worse, someone connected to his secrets. The detective stepped back, giving them space. Come with me. Now. Margaret exchanged a broken, disbelieving look with Elena, the two women linked by pain and confusion. Without speaking, they followed Rourke out of the funeral home, leaving behind the casket that had anchored their lives only minutes before. The rain soaked them as they stepped into the night, each drop cold against their skin. The storm raged harder now, as if reflecting the chaos unraveling inside them. Thomas Hale was dead, but his secrets were very much alive. And the deeper they went, the darker it would get. Because behind the lies, behind the money, behind the double marriage, something far more dangerous waited to be exposed. The ride to the sheriff's office was silent except for the hum of the engine and the relentless pounding of rain against the patrol SUV. Margaret and Elena sat on opposite sides of the back seat, separated by a gulf of shock, betrayal, and disbelief so heavy it felt like a third passenger. Neither woman dared look at the other, not yet. Not until their minds caught up with the reality they had stumbled into. One funeral, two wives, and a fortune neither knew existed. Detective Samuel Rourke kept glancing at them in the rearview mirror, studying their faces the way a surgeon studies a life before making the first incision. He had handled domestic disputes, fraud cases, and even a few major embezzlements in his 20 years. But he had never escorted two grieving wives of the same man to the station on the same night. And he had certainly never seen a case where the victim's funeral became the crime scene. When they arrived, he guided them down a quiet hallway to a small, neutral interview room. No interrogation lights, no pressure, just 3 chairs, a table, and a thick folder placed in the center, one that seemed to pulse with answers both women feared and needed. Rourke sat down, opened the folder, and spoke gently but firmly. First, I'm sorry for the shock tonight. I know this isn't how any of you plan to grieve, but we don't have the luxury of time. Someone moved money out of one of Thomas's hidden accounts within hours of his death. That means someone else knew something neither of you did. Margaret folded her arms tightly. Detective, I don't understand any of this. Thomas was an accountant, yes, but we lived on a budget. Most months we worried about retirement. There's no way he had millions. Elena let out a humorless laugh, bitter, wounded. He told me the same thing. He said he worked for small businesses. He said we had to save every penny. Her voice cracked. We rented a condo on his salary. Rourke nodded. That's consistent with the pattern. Men who lead double lives often create a neutral narrative. One income, modest lifestyle, nothing flashy. It keeps both households from questioning inconsistencies. Margaret blinked, tears rising. So everything was fake. Not everything, Rourke replied softly, but a great deal of it. He slid 2 photos across the table, screenshots from the bank's emergency fraud flagging system. Numbers, transfers, account IDs. Margaret stared. This can't be real. It is, Rourke said. Thomas had 7 separate accounts under various shell companies. He opened them using layered documentation, fake consulting contracts, dummy payroll, non-existent business expenses. On paper, it looked like he was managing funds for clients. In reality, he was moving his own money around, hiding it between identities. Elena's breath trembled. But where did 6.2 million come from? The detective leaned back. That's what we're trying to figure out. The deposits didn't match his legitimate income. We suspect he diverted client taxes, skimmed from trust accounts, and used two different lives to mask the discrepancies. Small amounts over many years. Slow accumulation. A secret nest egg. Margaret's mouth fell open. My husband stole? We're not calling it that yet, Rourke said carefully, but there are red flags. Elena covered her face with trembling hands. He told me he was stressed because his job was demanding. He said he was under pressure. Margaret whispered, he said that to me too. The detective continued, the problem isn't just the money. Someone accessed one of those accounts at 3:24 this morning, 5 hours after his time of death. Both women looked up sharply. Margaret swallowed. Who? Who would know his passwords? Elena shook her head. He never let me near his computer. I thought he was protecting client privacy. Rourke flipped another sheet. The IP address on the withdrawal was traced to a motel 30 minutes from here. Paid in cash. No ID provided. Margaret felt her stomach twist. Detective Asa, is it possible Thomas had another woman? Elena's eyes widened in fear. Rourke hesitated. We don't jump to conclusions, but the fact remains, someone knew about the money, someone he trusted enough to share the access. That could be a relative, a business partner. He paused. Or someone else. Margaret suddenly stood as if her body rejected the chair. I need air. Elena rose too. Me too. Rourke led them to a quiet hallway where they could gather themselves. For a moment, they stood side by side, strangers connected by a man who had lied to them both. Neither spoke. Each carried their own private collapse. After a minute, Margaret whispered, 6 years. He married you 6 years ago? Elena nodded, voice barely audible. He said his first wife left him. He said she'd abandoned the marriage. He said you didn't want him anymore. Margaret closed her eyes as pain rippled through every bone. He told me he was traveling for work. He told me he was taking on new clients. I believed him. I never imagined. Elena looked at her, tears falling freely. I didn't know about you. I swear I didn't. Margaret didn't speak, but something inside her, some quiet, broken truth, believed her. When they returned to the room, Rourke had placed a USB drive on the table. We found something else, he said. A safe deposit box registered under Thomas's first and middle name, but not his legal last name. It's been untouched for 8 years. Margaret frowned. What's in it? We don't know yet, but the bank will allow access first thing in the morning, and I need both of you to witness it. Elena squinted at the drive. Then what's this? Rourke took a breath. This contains something found on his work computer, something that may explain the money, and possibly the double life. He plugged the drive into the station laptop. A single audio file appeared. Hale recorded statement, MP3 timestamp, 2 weeks before his death. Margaret gasped. He left a recording? Rourke nodded. The IT team found it hidden under encrypted financial software. We haven't played it yet. I wanted you both to be here. Elena pressed a hand to her chest. Play it. Rourke clicked. At first, nothing but static. Then Thomas's voice, calm, measured, the same tone he had used to soothe them both for years. If you're hearing this, then I'm dead. Margaret sucked in a breath. Elena collapsed into a chair. The recording continued. I've made mistakes, bigger than either of you could ever imagine. I don't know which of you will hear this first, Margaret or Elena, but I know I owe you both the truth. Silence, then a shaky exhale. For 17 years, I've lived a lie. I didn't plan it at first. I didn't plan any of them. I fell in love twice, and instead of doing the right thing, I built a second life. I thought I could balance everything. I thought I could control the consequences. Margaret's tears fell silently. Elena's hands trembled uncontrollably. Thomas continued, but the money was different. It didn't start as theft. I made one mistake for a client who was laundering funds. I covered it up. And then I was trapped. I had to keep the cycle moving to protect myself. Every time I tried to get ahead of it, it got worse. He paused, voice tightening. And someone found out. Rourke's eyes flicked up sharply. Thomas's voice returned, lower, haunted. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident, and it won't be natural. Elena's breath caught. Margaret pressed a hand against her mouth. Thomas continued, there's someone who knows everything. Someone who said they'd ruin both my families if I didn't cooperate. Someone who wanted access to the money I hid. The static thickened. His voice came back, fractured by fear. I am begging you, whoever you are, do not trust anyone who shows up after I'm gone. Not my partner at the firm, not the man who handled my offshore filings. And especially not. A loud crash burst through the speakers, papers scattering, a chair tipping. Then Thomas yelled, "Wait, don't!" The recording ended abruptly. Elena screamed. Margaret collapsed forward, shaking violently. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Finally, Rourke whispered, someone was in the room with him. Elena cried, he was scared. He was begging. Someone killed him. Margaret looked up with hollow eyes. He didn't just die. Someone made sure he couldn't expose them. Rourke nodded grimly. This is no longer a financial investigation. This is a homicide. The storm outside seemed to roar in agreement. By morning, both women were escorted to the bank to open the safe deposit box. Neither slept. Neither spoke more than necessary. Their grief had fused into a fragile alliance, two victims of the same deception, forced into each other's world. The banker retrieved the box and placed it on the table. Rourke opened it. Inside was a single envelope labeled, "If anything happens to me," for Margaret and Elena. Margaret hesitated, then reached for it with trembling hands. Elena steadied her wrist. They opened it together. Inside was a handwritten letter. By the time you read this, I know you'll both hate me. You should, but you deserve to know the final truth. The money wasn't mine, not most of it. It belonged to a client who used me to hide funds tied to illegal operations. I didn't know at first. I was naive. But by the time I realized I was in too deep, I tried to expose him. I recorded proof. That's why he came after me. That's why I'm writing this. Rourke's eyes narrowed. Who's he? Margaret turned the page. Thomas had written a name that sent a shock through all three of them. Victor Delgado. Rourke exhaled sharply. Delgado, he's under federal investigation. Fraud, racketeering, bribery, and he was your husband's biggest client. The letter continued. If anything happens to me, it's because he found out I was preparing a statement for investigators. The recording on my computer isn't the only copy. There's a backup, hidden where he'll never find it, and where you'll know what to do with it. Elena whispered, where is it? At the bottom of the page, one line shook them all. Look where the truth began. Margaret frowned. What does that mean? Rourke stood suddenly. His office, the original branch where he started. There was a storage unit attached to the building. If he hid anything from Delgado, it would be there. They moved fast. Rourke requested backup. Margaret and Elena followed him in a separate car, hearts pounding with dread. Every mile brought them closer to whatever truth Thomas had buried, and whatever danger he had tried desperately to outrun. The storage unit was small, cold, and packed with dusty boxes, old client files, receipts, a broken printer, nothing unusual. Until Margaret spotted a sealed metal box tucked behind a filing cabinet. Rourke pried it open. Inside was a flash drive, a stack of papers, and a prepaid phone. The flash drive contained a full confession, names, accounts, dates, enough to destroy Delgado's empire. The papers were evidence, receipts tracing money laundering operations. The phone had one text message drafted but unsent. To Margaret and Elena, I'm sorry, tell the truth, don't let him bury it. Before they could process the find, headlights swept across the unit. A black SUV rolled in slowly. Rourke's hand went to his holster. Margaret whispered, trembling, who is that? The door opened. A tall man stepped out. Expensive suit, cold eyes, movements too deliberate. Victor Delgado himself. Rourke hissed, get behind me. Delgado smiled faintly. I was wondering when someone would find that box. Elena froze. Margaret shook violently. Delgado stepped forward as if greeting old acquaintances. You weren't supposed to hear the recording, he said calmly. Thomas was supposed to destroy it, but he always had a soft spot for insurance. Rourke drew his weapon. Stay where you are. Delgado's smile didn't fade. I'm not here to shoot anyone, detective. I'm here for what Thomas stole from me. 6.2 million. That money doesn't belong to these women. And it certainly doesn't belong to you. Margaret found her voice. You killed him. Delgado shrugged lightly. Let's not complicate things with accusations. Rourke stepped forward. Turn around. Hands where I can see them. Delgado didn't move. Instead, he said, if I walk out of here without that evidence, nothing happens to your families. You go home, you grieve, you forget this. But if you hand it over to authorities, then I will make sure you regret it. Margaret's heart pounded. Elena's knees nearly buckled, but Rourke remained steady. You're done, Delgado. Federal agents are already on their way. For the first time, Delgado's expression cracked. Rourke held firm. You were under surveillance. Every move you made has been tracked since last month, including this one. Sirens wailed in the distance. Delgado backed away slowly, calculating, assessing, realizing the collapse he'd worked so hard to avoid was finally at his feet. Moments later, federal agents swarmed the building. Delgado was handcuffed, furious, silent. The evidence Thomas left behind was secured, and for the first time since the funeral, both wives could breathe. The aftermath unfolded over months. Delgado was indicted on dozens of charges. The hidden funds, every account, were seized by federal authorities. Margaret and Elena testified, together, side by side. And though neither inherited the 6.2 million, they inherited something else entirely. The truth. The kind that destroys, the kind that frees, the kind that leaves scars but finally lets the wound close. Margaret sold the home she once shared with Thomas's and moved closer to her sister. Elena returned to school, reclaiming a future she once built around a lie. They didn't become close friends, but they stayed connected, a quiet reminder of the storm they survived. Sometimes grief ties strangers together more tightly than love ever could. In the end, the darkest part wasn't the money, or the betrayal, or even the man who threatened to silence them. The darkest part was how easily Thomas hid the truth beneath the lives of the two women who loved him most. And though his secrets were finally exposed, the damage was already done. The last words of this story linger like the echo of a storm long past. When love is built on lies, the truth always comes for its debt. And sometimes, the cost is everything. Now it's your turn to reflect. If you uncovered a secret that shattered every certainty you once held, would you bury it or bring it into the light? Thank you for walking through the shadows of this case. Your presence gives meaning to every story we reveal.